So welcome everybody to the Andocia Podcast. Our mission at Andocia is to accelerate your growth by building brands that cannot be ignored. So in today's episode of the podcast, I'm interviewing Doug Smith, who's the founder of L3 Leadership, and also, what is your title at the mission?
The Assistant Executive Director, or as we say internally, the Assistant to the Executive
Director.
Yes. For those Office fans, yeah.
Incredible, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Doug. You're really special to me. We'll get into that in the episode, but the whole purpose of our podcast is predicated upon our number one core value, and that's we get your vision. So we're not here to say, here's 5 steps on how to do marketing, or here's what Andocia's about, or, to rah-rah around us, but to spend time talking about you, our client, and what you do and what sets you apart. And so I'm really excited to talk about L3 Leadership, which is the organization you started, the one that we get to serve. And you're just a great guy. So you're going to hear a lot about Doug Smith. Doug is actually the first person that I met in Pittsburgh when I moved here, almost 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And man, we've just had a great friendship, and you trust me to run marketing for your organization. And you're awesome. So if you could tell everybody, or me, what you do, and then we'll kind of transition that into L3 Leadership.
Yeah, I mean, on the front end, you mentioned Light of Life Rescue Mission. So for the past 12 years vocationally, I've worked at a rescue mission in Pittsburgh. For those who may not know what that is, it's a nonprofit that serves the homeless. Yeah. And I've spent my career there in development, so fundraising, and then recently got promoted into more of a number 2 role, helping run the day-to-day operations of the organization. But the company that I started, that we work with, Andocia with, is called L3 Leadership. And really, all my life since I was about 18, I've been very passionate about connecting and developing leaders, so much so that I started a company to do just that. And so we have a podcast that is now over 10 years old, and I think we're at 375 episodes. And Andocia actually edits and produces our podcast, and extremely, extremely grateful. I remember the days of producing that myself, and man, thank God those days are behind me.
Yeah.
But the podcast, and we reach thousands of leaders every month, which is awesome. We do Mastermind Groups, which you've been a part of groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together for at least 1 year in order to grow and hold each other accountable and to do life together. And then we have a one-day leadership conference as well, which you've also been a part of.
Yeah.
Again, and we want to help leaders grow their network, their leadership, and their future. So that's kind of an 80,000-foot view.
Let's go. So I eat, sleep, and breathe leadership stuff, just like you, just like many, other leaders and entrepreneurs. But the reality is, when we say words like leadership company, masterminds, leadership conferences, I mean, that's a little bit more obvious, but I would venture to say 80% of people, if not 90% of people, have no clue what that concept is or what that means. So what is a leadership company like L3 Leadership? What is a mastermind? Can you explain, we have no clue what that organization is and why you started it?
Yeah, so I think for me, leadership is a sexy word, especially in today's culture. Everyone talks about leadership and leadership development, but the true passion for me behind the company L3 Leadership is really all about personal growth. A little bit about my story. I grew up and graduated high school with a very low GPA. Never thought I would amount to anything. Certainly didn't see myself as a leader. And through an unfortunate experience, I lost my mom when I was a senior. And through that experience, I actually became a person of faith and had men and women come into my life and become father figures and mother figures, and really started to pour into me this vision that, Doug, if you start to be intentional with your life, if you'll allow God to develop you and you'll develop yourself, you could really do great things and you can be a leader and change the world. And so that really set me on fire for really just this mindset of I want to do everything I can for the rest of my life to grow into the person that I was created to be and to do everything that I'm capable of doing. And as I started growing personally, that ultimately put me in a position where people were coming to me and asking me to help grow them. And what I think is true of every person listening to this, whether they're in a leadership role or not, everyone has a huge capacity and a huge potential to do great things with their life. And I think part of my job and want is, through what we do at L3 Leadership, is to just really show people the greatness that's already inside of them and then draw that out and help develop it. And so for the podcast, I started a podcast when 2012, because a leader came into my life, and he would have leaders come in from the community and they would add value to us, and they'd say, hey, if you connected with that leader that was sharing, you should ask them out to coffee and ask them to mentor you and take them out for coffee. And they gave us this whole process. And so I started doing that for about 10 years. And if you're listening to this, my peers started coming to me and saying, wow, Doug, you get to spend time with all these great leaders. I wish that I could. And what I tell people is, you could. All you have to do is ask. But it blows my mind that 99% of people on the planet are just afraid to ask. And so I saw it as an opportunity, and I just thought, hey, what if I just started recording those conversations just like this that I'm having with leaders? And if anyone listens to it, hopefully it'll add value to your life. And never thought that would, result in adding value to thousands of leaders on a monthly basis. You and I are sitting here. I just had the opportunity to interview Coach Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I've just been blown away by the doors that the podcast has opened. But really, my hope is that on a weekly basis, I'm able to come in through the podcast into leaders' life and help lift them and expose them to leaders that can help them grow into that potential.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. You want me to keep rolling? Yeah.
I think you could keep rolling.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to bring us back around to Masterminds, but kind of push in a little bit on the podcast. So why might somebody who doesn't consider themselves a leader, or they're not, director of something, or CEO or entrepreneur or whatever, maybe they're just but maybe they're a mom or a dad, or, maybe a middle manager, or maybe they're on the bottom of the totem pole, like, why is a leadership podcast or a leadership talk that they can go to, iTunes podcast or, Spotify and listen to? Why is it important?
Yeah, so for me, I say this all the time in L3 Leadership. I believe that you're one idea and one relationship away from changing your destiny. I'll say that again because that changed my life. You're one idea and one relationship away from changing your destiny. And so you have no idea, that one podcast, someone may say something in that episode that literally changes the trajectory of your life. It gives you the courage you needed to go start a business. It caused you to overcome an insecurity. I don't know what the idea is, but that's why you need to consistently be consuming content. And as we grow, every year that we grow, we have different needs for growth. And again, you never know when the right podcast at the right time will just hit home. And the same thing with the relationships, and we'll talk about mastermind groups, but you're getting exposed to all these great leaders that you may not ever have a chance to sit down with, but you can get exposed to their content. And so I've had thousands of mentors in my life that are world-class that I've never had the opportunity to meet, and I've met them through their books and through podcasts. And those have been two of the greatest sources of growth in my life outside of masterminds.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So good. So that's the podcast again. For somebody who's not familiar with the concept of a podcast, that's probably a little far out, but you interview leaders for about 30 minutes. It's like a radio show. It's recorded, syndicated across different, platforms. People can download the episodes and listen to you interview people like Coach Tomlin or other great leaders or local leaders or whatever. And the reason why I like podcasts so much is just I find it motivational.
Yes.
Like sometimes it's not just like some time ago somebody related leadership content to me kind of like eating.
Yes.
Like you don't remember every meal you ate, like even yesterday probably or last week, right? But like everything you put in your body gave you more energy and nutrition. And every once in a while you eat something that's super good. You don't remember everything about it, but it's just that constant like feeding you. And I feel like leadership content's the same, or reading books is the same. The point isn't retention entirely. The point is to keep that like tank full, you know what I mean, to keep you driving. And I feel like that's applicable to anybody regardless of what seat they sit in.
Yeah, and you have time. For me, I have a half-hour commute each way every day. I've been working at the same place for 12 years. That's my podcast time. So literally, for the past 12 years, I've been listening almost an hour or more a day, and I put it on 1.5 speed, sometimes 2x, because I'm a maniac. But, you think about that time multiplied. I remember the famous quote by Earl Nightingale. He said, if you'll study a subject for an hour a day for 5 years, you'll become an expert in that area. We can do that exponentially with the time we have to read read books and listen to podcasts. So I just want to encourage people, take time. I had this one leader tell me once, make your downtime prime time, which is so cheesy. But it's true. If you have downtime, throw in a podcast and grow, and you'll be shocked looking back at how much you've retained.
Let's go. All right, so let's talk briefly about masterminds here as we kind of land this plane.
Yeah.
Man, so the concept of a mastermind group or a leadership network, because it's another vertical of what L3 leadership does, right?
Yes.
You have the podcast, you put on a conference. We won't go over that because a conference is pretty basic, right?
Yeah.
You bring leaders together in a room with keynote speakers and stuff. But talk to me about this concept of a small group or a mastermind for leaders. What does that look like, and why might somebody join one?
Yeah, so a mastermind group, at least that I'm aware of, originated in a book called Think and Grow Rich, which a lot of people know. Yeah.
Is a phenomenal book. I read it every year.
Yeah, must read. And the author of it, his name's Napoleon Hill, if you don't know the background. And Andrew Carnegie hired him for 25 years to study the top most influential and wealthiest business people and leaders of that era, and then basically write a book on what he found. And one of the key characteristics he found in the people he interviewed is every single one of them, in one way, shape, or form or another, were in what he called a mastermind alliance. So we added group instead of alliance, but it's just a group of people. It could, I recommend no less than 6, no more than 12, that meet together on a consistent basis to hold each other accountable, to do life together, and to grow together. And so that requires a lot of intentionality. But for me, one of our core values at L3 is community. And I say it all the time, but we believe that no leader should ever do life alone, but in community. And I remember Henry Cloud sharing this statistic that he said that he believes about 85% of leaders don't have a single person, let alone a group, a single person that they can confide in and process things with. And leaders are so isolated. And so our goal with L3 leadership is we want to get every leader, and I would say person, in a mastermind group that meets consistently. And again, I've been in mastermind groups now for 8 years. They've been the single greatest source of growth in my life because you do life together. And really our vision behind being in a group together is for the reason we want people to experience 3 things. We want them to be fully known. What does that mean? We want them to actually have a place where they can share what they're going through, share the high highs with, but also share the low lows with, and that they'll be fully known and they can be fully transparent and be themselves. Number 2 is we want them to be fully loved. So sometimes we can actually put ourselves in a dangerous situation if we share with the wrong people. But if you're in a mastermind group of people who will help grow you and stretch you, they're also going to fully love you, regardless of what you're going through and regardless of what you share. Now, those 2 things are important, but the third one's probably the most important. It's fully challenged. So fully challenged means, for me, sometimes we want a pat on the back and a hug, which is me. Like I'm a words of affirmation guy. Just tell me I'm awesome. Tell me it's going to be okay. Yeah. But oftentimes in those situations, what we actually need is a slap in the face. We need challenge, and we need to be told the truth. And those are the times where we grow the most. I can point back to probably 10 of the most significant growth times of my life came as a result of someone telling me something I didn't want to hear and love and fully challenging me. So again, the goal is really that you, leader, if you're listening to this, do you have a place where you are fully known, fully loved, and fully challenged in a group setting? And if you don't, you need to find it. In my personal opinion, you need to be in a mastermind group. And we run them here at L3 Leadership. You can either launch your own group or join one yourself, and we can send you more information on that if you're interested.
Let's go. So last portion here. Talk to me about what you're doing to market and communicate what L3 does in a unique way. And, talk about how the podcast kind of plays in as sort of a top of the funnel for getting guys into these masterminds and ladies as well.
Yeah, the podcast is great because, again, podcast has probably been our number one marketing tool because, again, I think it's low-hanging fruit. You don't have to do much to listen to a podcast. You can just plop it on your car like we talked about. And so I think when people hear that and then, slowly they start investing in themselves, they start to think, okay, this is great that I'm growing in my car when I'm listening to something, but if I'm really going to grow, I need to do it with people. I need it in person. And so my hope is that a podcast or social media marketing, et cetera, which Andocia helps us with, that people see what people are experiencing in mastermind groups after listening to the podcast or after getting intentional about growth and saying, I think to go to the next level, that's exactly what I need. Yeah. And so that's been a huge pipeline for us.
Yeah, I love it. And we try to convince a lot of the people that we get to serve to do either podcasts or some sort of teaching series, because I love how it establishes you as a thought leader, which really is a phenomenal advertising tool, because now you've got people brought in, they know that they can trust you, they know that you're a leader in the industry, and so when you say, okay, now you need to be a part of this, their ears are open, their hearts are open, and you can, in a shrewd way, sell better.
Yeah. I would just say on the podcasting end, as far as a marketing tool, it's huge. One, I would just say, don't do it for numbers. Like, just do it to add value to people and stay consistent. This is the biggest thing. Like, stay consistent and basically just say, I'm not going to quit. Like, I'm going to set a goal initially if you're just launching. Hey, we're going to do at least 100 episodes and just see what happens. And Will has access to my podcast stats. If you look at the podcast listenership for the first 2 or 3 years, I didn't get a lot of traction, but all of a sudden it starts going up and up and up, and it's continued to go up over years. So one, I would just say start where you are, and you'll be shocked at how many people actually do listen and who you reach. Like, I've had people tell me they listen to my podcast and I almost faint. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I can't believe because I started this podcast, I now have influence in this leader's life. That's crazy. The last thing I'll say, when you were talking about becoming a thought leader, I really want to challenge leaders, and I wish I was more consistent in this. But when I started the podcast, I wanted to be intentional, but that yes, I would interview leaders, but I would also do personal leadership lessons.
Let's go.
Because people want to hear my voice. And if you're listening to this, people want to hear your voice. And I remember Gary Vaynerchuk saying something recently that resonated so much with me. He just said when he started his podcast, which is basically, he interviews a few people, but it's primarily his voice. He said, I realized that 95+% of podcasts are just people interviewing people. And the reason they're doing that is because they're insecure and they don't feel like they have something to share. And so if you can overcome that hurdle and realize you do have something to share, well, I remember you and Marissa telling me that greatly encouraged me, like, Doug, we love the interviews, but man, we really love hearing your voice. And I just want to encourage leaders today. You'd be shocked at how many people will really love hearing your voice if you'll just put it out there. And again, Andocia can help you do that.
Let's go. Doug, thank you so much. If you have more information, or if you want more information on L3 Leadership, you can go to l3leadership.org. You can learn more about Doug there, as well as his, really, your full-time job at Light of Life. You guys are doing incredible work in the city. So thank you, Doug. You're a close friend, incredible client. Love you. Thanks so much for listening.